citizen.
Out of many
We are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voice.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we bring you solutionaries. The world is so filled with darkness and problems and challenges in the world, and there's so many incredible videos and programs about all the ways that we're being battered and all the ways we're drowning, all the ways we can drive ourselves to extinction. What we try to focus on is the solutionaries, the people who have key solutions, key levers that can help shift us from this culture of violence, from this ocean of darkness, and bring us to the ocean of light where a rising humanity can actually be unleashed as the third superpower that actually saves our planet and brings us from that ocean of darkness to a thriving future that's bright and that's regenerative and that's participatory and that helps lift us all. And today, we have a very, very special guest who is one of the key proponents of just such a shift and one of the inspirations to me in my life and to so many other people. We have Michael Nagler. Michael Nagler heads the Metta Center for Nonviolence. He's recently produced a film on the Third Harmony and an incredible book called The Third Harmony. I highly recommend it. It's available both as a reader, but he also does his own reading of it not only on Kindle, but it's on Audible. And it's a lot of fun to just listen to it, while you're taking walks, riding, doing dishes, whatever. So I highly recommend that incredible book. And let's start out with you personally a little bit, and then we'll get into the Third Harmony. Tell us a little bit more about your own background and how you got started on a path to nonviolence.
Well, thank you so much, Arthur, and welcome everybody. Especially people that I know before, but not necessarily only them. I felt that I could not possibly participate in violence from a fairly young age. One of the problems was I was the shortest kid in my school, so violence was definitely a losing game for me. But be that as it may, I didn't like it, and so when I had to register for the draft, I became a conscientious objector. And I remember that out here in California talking to a counselor, Robert Pickus, who's helped hundreds of people get out of the military. And he started questioning me. And after a couple of minutes, he said, "Oh my gosh, you're the real thing." Most people, he has to kind of pretend that they have a religious background, stuff like that. But I really had this sense from early on somehow of the sanctity of life. Not that I wasn't a nasty kid, growing up in Brooklyn, public school 193. But no, I was just kind of constitutionally against it. And then of course, turned legally against it when I came of draft age. Said, I'm absolutely not going. And the only thing that kept me out of a long legal ramble was my daughter was born. So that was under Kennedy and I was excused. Then I really, I guess I kind of came to have this orientation that nonviolence is not the absence of something, but it is a primordial positive thing in its own right. And so
that's really an essential, go into that more, because it's so funny that the English language has tons and tons of words for violence, but really no good word. Like in India, they invented satigraha, but that doesn't roll across over the tongues here too much. And nonviolence, is just saying it's not violence. That's what it's not, but doesn't say what it is. Tell us a little bit more about that essential essence that you discovered about nonviolence.
Eventually, I migrated to the discovery that nonviolence was the core of our being. It's really connected with love in not in a non-romantic or beyond the romantic, beyond the Hollywood sense, but love as a positive, creative, driving force behind reality. So that when you're becoming nonviolent in your orientation, you're actually grounding yourself in reality. And it's not that conflict won't happen. What we say in the field, right, David, is conflict is inevitable, violence is not. So we need ways of living that don't generate conflict. And then because it's impossible to avoid it altogether, we need ways of negotiating and resolving conflict without ill will, without the intention to harm. See, the Sanskrit word ahimsa literally means the absence of any intention to harm. Satyagraha, Arthur, that you were talking about, is more, these days, it's more a name for the campaigns, you know, the salt satyagraha, etc.
So ahimsa. Well, that's
Ahimsa. Ahimsa.
Ahimsa. Thank you. Tell me, one of the things that really excited me about reading your book, The Third Harmony, is that it struck me as sort of a parallel to, you know, Einstein was looking for a unifying theory of everything. And in a way, that was the exhilarated feeling I kind of had as I read it, that you put together so many different things as that seem like separate issues. You know, everything from you know, from the racial strife, from the problem of prisons, from the problems of punishment, raising kids, abuse, whatever it is, alcoholism, all these things. There all seems to be a unifying two different worldviews. One which kind of leads to the incredible challenges we have that, in fact, at the ultimate point would bring us to extinction, and another one that brings us into, well, as you mentioned, the third harmony. Tell us a little bit more about your grand theory of everything.
Yeah, I don't think Einstein would have objected at all. Because I say the way I see nonviolence and the way Gandhi understood it, and a lot of us do, is it's, you know, creation was a positive force. It was not an afterthought, you know, not a result of cosmic accidents, some ions shooting through some clouds. But this life of ours is purposeful. It takes on beauty and health when we discover what our purpose is. In fact, there's a special term for that in Sanskrit. You're probably all familiar with the term dharma, which means, you know, the underlying law of existence. But there also was in India the idea of svadharma, that each of us has his or her own particular approach that fits us into this worldwide scheme of, you could say, nonviolence. But as I point out in the book, nonviolence isn't really an adequate translation of ahimsa, because first of all, negative terms that start with that A in Sanskrit are often really pointers at something positive, not just limits of something negative. And himsa does not mean violence, really. It means the desire to harm. So it's grounded deeply, you know, in our heart when we do not wish ill on any person or any creature, that we come into our own as a human being. And we can call that nonviolence, for want of a better word.
Well, let's run through maybe tick off a list of some of the major challenges we're facing in our society, and tell us how each is kind of linked to this difference of two worldviews. What's the prevailing mythology and what's the new reality? New, but really very, very old and ancient. What's the reality that conflicts with the myths that are misdirecting our society?
The fundamental myth that's misdirecting our society, and I'm not the first or the only one to say this, is the myth of separateness. That we're living in different parts of the universe right now, have different names and histories, and all of that is fine, but that's not essentially who we are. And the closer and closer you get to the essence of who we are, the more and more we are united within one grand being, as one grand being. So obviously, nonviolence is a saner orientation than violence, given that that's our, so to speak, our condition is, our underlying condition or state is one of absolute unity. And the more we can realize that, the better off we are. You mentioned before in our earlier conversation, Arthur, about how law is helpful to limit nonviolence, to limit violence. But as Gandhi would say, the underlying law is nonviolence. The ancient scriptures said, ahimsa paramo dharma, nonviolence is the highest, most ultimate law, and natural law, not a law passed by human beings.
Well, in our culture, we're battered over and over again by movies and TV shows that perpetuate this myth of the hero with the big gun. And in that myth, it's the same old story over and over again. Yep. There's a poor damsel in distress. The damsel can be, the people of any country, Afghanistan or whatever else. The poor women are being exploited. And then here comes the hero who tries to reason, but it won't work. The bad guy is just too bad. Finally, the hero uses superior violence, blows away the bad guy, and rides off into the sunset with the girl. That was the traditional story, and it's retold with different characters and casts over and over again in outer space and everywhere. And yet, the reality is, I've never met anybody who ever, killed the bad guys and lived happily ever after. I mean, it totally doesn't happen in real life. We see huge empires like the French Empire tried to beat the Vietnamese. The mighty U.S. Empire tried to beat them and couldn't do it. The mighty Soviet Empire tried to beat the people, the tribesmen in Afghanistan. And then we spent, the U.S. spent 20 years with the most advanced, powerful military of the world, and they couldn't do it. All it did is drive the place more into the hand of the most extreme fringe of repression and so on, and it didn't help the women. The were supposed to be the damsels in distress we were supposed to be rescuing. It didn't help at all. 20 years of that, and yet every time this myth fails, we seem to say, okay, we need more military spending, more military budget to try to make it work. Why?
I think the answer to that is to have some compelling narratives of the opposite force, call it love, nonviolence, or what you will. And that's what we're working on partly here at the Metta Center for Nonviolence, is to take stories of cooperation instead of competition, of helping instead of harming. And these stories are so moving and heartwarming. Just yesterday in the Press Democrat, there's a story of these 4 high school kids who were walking past a frame house in Santa Rosa and saw smoke pouring out of the window, rushed in, broke down a couple of doors to save some poor guy who was kind of disabled and couldn't get out of the house in time. And those are the real stories that reveal who we really are, namely all of us connected as one great being. So along those lines, if you don't mind, we at the Metta Center, we've created a game called Cosmic Peace Force, which is based on nonviolent principles instead of violent ones. And of course, it's fictional and it's just a game, but the dynamic involved, the logic, is perfectly reasonable.
Wow, I've got to buy that for my grandkids. How do I get that incredible game? I
thought you'd never ask. We actually, the third harmony that we're talking about today is a project that has three components deliverable. One is the film that's available on Bullfrog Films and through the Metta Center. And one is that game, and one is the book, my book that we're talking about, the Third Harmony. And they're all available at thirdharmony.org.
Well, there's so many powerful stories in your book, but let me just give one, let you tell us about one example. We hear about all these school shootings, and now we see they're putting up metal detectors and they're putting police in the schools and militarizing kind of the schools. Tell us one of the stories of one of the teachers who was dealing with such a hostage situation and how she handled it.
Yeah, actually, they've made it into a film. She was in a school in Decatur, Georgia, and this fellow came in with an assault rifle and said he was going to shoot up the school. And she immediately reached out to him on a wavelength of empathy. She said, you seem to be having a lot of trouble. I'm having troubles too. And so they were sharing troubles, and one thing led to another. And the next thing you know, she had talked him into putting down his rifle and lying down on the floor and letting her call the police and come in and take him away. And this is a rare nonviolence story, not in the sense that it has a positive outcome. If it's really nonviolence, there will always be a positive outcome on one or more levels, but in the fact that it was recognized, that it was made into a film.
Right, over and over again.
I'm sorry, Faith Under Fire. Violence in schools hurts us more than violence anywhere else. That's where they tend to go to. So this young boy walked in, and I talk about this in the book because she handled it in a classical way that was extremely creative. She didn't say, no, don't do that, you're wrong. But she said, I'm with you. We're not separate. I have problems too. And she expressed sympathy for him and just eventually talked him down and talked him into putting down the gun and turning himself in. I wish we had something better to do with a person like that than get him arrested, but at least it was enough to protect those children in that school.
Essentially, that gets sort of to the core of what your whole project's about, and that is instead of picturing the enemy, the bad guy, the offender, as something to be despised, forced, put down, you find there's actually much more power in recognizing the humanity in that person. Yeah. and the pain, right?
That's almost entirely, I'd say it's 99% of the time, that's what they really want. They're trying to assert their humanity in often the only way they know how. And so you can kind of do an end run around the way that they're showing their need and speak directly to that need. So the first step is overcoming fear. Then that gives you the capacity to use your creative thinking to empathize with the person, see what they're really after. David and I have a very good friend, Mel Duncan, who was walking past a field, I guess, somewhere in Minnesota, and there was a really disturbed guy who was beating up on some helpless smaller guy. And now my response would have been, rush in, jump him from behind, or if I really felt brave, stand in between them or something. But Mel went up to this guy and just looked him right in the eye, and he said, gee, you're quite a leader, aren't you? And start off by praising him, by acknowledging him, by giving him support, and then lead him from there to a more peaceful resolution. But that requires creativity, and it requires something that isn't natural, in our culture, unfortunately, and that is empathy, as feeling that you are not separate from the other person.
Empathy, that's so key. And you also mentioned that you wish there was an alternative to carting him off to jail. Talk a little bit about the mythology that runs the prison industrial system and the alternative reality in actual fact.
Yeah. Well, the tragedy of the prison industrial system is, on the one hand, it does not work. It makes things worse. It dehumanizes when exactly what you need to do is rehumanize, unnatural as that may seem. And the unfortunate thing is that the prison industrial system makes a lot of money. If something makes a lot of money, it's going to be very difficult to disestablish in our civilization. But there is a very healthy, very successful alternative that is being known slowly but surely. I wish it would happen faster. And that's called restorative justice. We mentioned it in the book, we mentioned it in the film. It means essentially that you recognize first and foremost that every participant has a point, that they're not in there just to disrupt, to destroy, to separate. They have a need. And by conversation, you can usually gratify that need and end a problem. It requires systemic change as well.
You talk about studies and examples that actually prove that the restorative justice is far more effective. And in fact, in some countries, that's sort of the leading way of handling offenders. And tell us about that and how much more successful it actually is.
Right. Well, actually, you can get more statistics and some more stories about this from a Dutch writer named Rutger Bregman, Bregman, and his book is entitled something about human nature, and that's really basically the point. If you are committed to violence, you're committed to one model, one image, one vision of human beings, who we are. And if you're committed to nonviolence, it comes from an entirely different vision, the more Einsteinian vision of all reality being embraced in a single unity. And so restorative justice indirectly relates to that vision of our connectedness.
You know, it's interesting that in almost in virtually every area, this old dominator mythology, and we've had some other very interesting podcasts talking about, partnership society versus the dominator and so on. But this whole dominator model, that if you can just out-bully the bully, if you can just, a zero tolerance in the school, we're gonna teach the bully that only the top bully succeeds because we're the top bully, and we're gonna bully all the bullies. That model that consistently fails. And then there's so much evidence to show that the nonviolent alternative consistently succeeds. Let's take that a moment up into the even higher level of wars in our society. How has war proven itself to be ineffective, and how has the alternative proven itself to be effective?
Well, clearly, we fight wars, quote, to end all wars, unquote, and they never do, because they engage violence and the lower, more separate parts of human nature and put it into action and make things worse. But the problem is that the institutions that are available for adjudicating conflicts that must arise, disputes that must arise, are primitive. They aren't as highly developed. They're definitely not as highly funded. And yet, as Erica Chenoweth will mention in the film, nonviolent uprisings, for example, and here we're not talking about really deep nonviolence where you are operating out of a sense of unity with the other, but at least, I'm not going to shoot you. So going at least that far, calling that nonviolence, that those episodes are twice as effective at a fraction of the cost, human and otherwise, than violent insurrections. Yeah, and you can measure this quite specifically, quite concretely. If you want to get rid of a dictatorship or an invading army, and you do it in ways that are humane and appeal to the humanity of the other, it requires you to be courageous and creative. But once you can do that, and also often it takes more time, not always, but sometimes quite a bit more time. But it is infinitely worth it, because what you've created in the end is a better framework. Whereas every time you use violence, even if it, quote, succeeds, beating the bad guys and all of that, it creates a worse framework, a sense of disharmony among us.
And it plants the seed for the next war, and it causes, and it creates, and it requires repression, continual repression to enforce it. So every time we fight for freedom, we're losing freedoms, right?
Yeah.
So one key example of what you're mentioning, I traveled to Lithuania with a Rotary exchange. That was where my grandfather came from, and we met with President Landsbergis, who was the leader of Lithuania when it became the first country to completely withdraw from the Soviet Empire, part of the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And they, when I look at the current situation, I see the incredible contrast to what they did. What they did is they had a singing revolution. And it was so interesting when I went to Lithuania. Even our tour guide said, well, I was standing on the top of this building, and I would tell people we were trying to protect our radio tower and our parliament from being taken over by the Soviet tanks. And so we'd say, oh, tanks are coming down, Revolution Avenue or whatever. And instead of running away from the tanks, everybody would rush to the tanks and block them. And what happened is, in the total revolution, that they had 14 people killed. They're very sad about those 14 people, but they beat the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union withdrew, and they became the first country to officially and completely withdraw from the Soviet Union. And all three Baltic states, people joined arm in arm across the entire three states, blocking the Soviet invasion. And this incredible nonviolent revolution was so powerful, and yet to the press, well, there wasn't much violence, so it kind of disappeared. It wasn't of interest to the press. But you contrast that with the incredible loss of life and challenges of what's happened in the Ukraine, where there was a nonviolent revolution too, but the violent kind of took over. And you see that there really is a force more powerful. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, David could tell you similar stories about Moscow in 1992. But this appeal to the humanity of the other is much more powerful, because it's based on reality, and because ultimately the secret is that even people who are in a frame of mind where they hate and they want to hurt, underneath that frame of mind is a yearning for reconnection, for unity. And if you can appeal to that, you just walk right through the violence and appeal to that, it has a tremendous power. Now, it doesn't always work immediately, of course, but it really, really pays off in the long-term results.
Love is really the most powerful force in the world. To me, when Jesus said, love your enemies, he wasn't saying, oh, be meek, let them beat on you. He was giving us the most powerful weapon for actually, it's the only weapon that can actually eliminate an enemy, totally eliminate an enemy, because the more you
enmity.
It eliminates the very enmity which makes enemies exist. And so that really is the crux of the key to the transformation we need. Now, you mentioned David could tell us more about things. I'm wondering if we want to throw it open to some questions yet, or at least bring David on for a few moments and then see if other people have questions and comments. Let Melanie take on running the question period here, and let's have her start with David, as you've mentioned.
Yes, thank you, Arthur. And this is fascinating. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. My goodness. And yes, like we said, we have David Hartsoe. David Hartsoe, we're talking about you. So let's have you go first, and then we'll go to Robin, if that's okay, Robin. Okay, good. David, go right ahead. Just unmute.
It was actually 1991, August of 1991, when there was a coup d'etat by the most reactionary forces in the Soviet Union against Gorbachev. Gorbachev was put under house arrest, and Yeltsin, at that time, who had been elected president of the Russian Republic, was in the Parliament building. It was called the White House. And the coup leaders actually instituted censorship and total repression against anyone that would be speaking out. And 10,000 people surrounded the White House for 3 days and nights. Tanks were sent in to get these people out of the way. And the women offered people food and cake and etc. And the tanks turned around. The whole Soviet military forces was under the control of this coup d'etat. Bombing planes came in to bomb the White House and saw the 10,000 people, civilians, surrounding the White House, and they decided they could not bomb. And I think that after 3 days, the coup leaders gave up and said, without the cooperation of the people, of the Soviet people, they could not take over. And I actually went back there. I was there in 1991, but also 1992, and I lived with a family of a soldier in the Soviet Army. And he told me the story that after those 14 people were killed in Lithuania who were nonviolently defending the TV towers, just there was a lot of discussion in the Soviet Army. You know, our purpose is to defend the country against outside enemies. But here we are out in killing innocent civilians in our own country. And they just decided we're not going to be following orders from an illegal government. So I think those are both examples of a force more powerful against what the United States considered the most terrible enemy in the world, who had no humanity.
Michael, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to mention that there's a similar story that took place in the Philippines, where the army was moving in on some rebellious soldiers, and the people came out and blocked this attacking force. And sure enough, a fighter pilot was sent out to bomb the people, and he looked down in his bomb sight, and he saw this mass of humanity, and he said, his hair stood up. He could feel his helmet kind of rising on his head, and he turned his plane around and landed it and handed it over to the rebels, and that was the end.
Wow.
Revolution.
Wow. goodness, both. Oh, what stories? What incredible stories. Wow. Oh
See,
my,
the world of nonviolence is just full of stories like this.
that's what we need to hear more of. I think people don't realize.
Yeah.
And wow, thank you for sharing, both of you. Yes, now we'd like to, Robin Lloyd, please come on and tell.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Robin Lloyd, Burlington, Vermont. A member of our community here has just gone to Romania, planning to go to the Ukraine. His name is John Royer, and he's a very articulate believer in nonviolence. He says, I've come to the hypothesis that nonviolence can accomplish whatever good that war purports to accomplish more effectively at a much lower cost. So, you know, he's going there on a kind of a quest. He's going to be with this nonviolence group in Romania. He's going to be bringing goods into Ukraine and seeing what people need, but also, I mean, he's trying to see whether some of the tenets of nonviolence can have any sway in the middle of an actual war where the missiles that are going are, in a sense, they're not directed. They're just sort of randomly, as I understand it. They're very hard to pinpoint the destination of a lot of these missiles. So it's a random thing. So how do you do nonviolence in a situation like that? I just am bringing him up to say that we all should hold him in the light, as the Quakers say, and I can send forward his messages. In fact, maybe he could be on your show, Arthur.
Oh, that would be great. Robin, could you put more information about him? And we definitely will hold him in the light. We need to just, if you put down his name and everything in the chat. And wow, so Michael, yes, what would you like to say to that?
Robin, to answer your question, what could nonviolence do in such an extreme situation? You have to realize that the question is in a way unfair, because you've waited for the violence to escalate until the absolute last stage and you're saying, okay, now you fix it.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be, I'm not saying that nonviolence can't resolve the situation, but the longer you wait, the more costly it is going to be in terms of human life. And so in the book, I developed this concept of the escalation curve. And as the escalation rises, the options shrink. And finally, when you get to the end, the only real option is self-sacrifice,
Wow.
Which is very powerful and often does work. But gee, you want to intervene sooner. You don't have to pay quite that much.
Yeah.
Wow. And I see David wanted to, specifically about this. David, you were going to say something?
Yeah, thank you. John and I are working together. He's also working on the possibility. I mean, people know that the nuclear power plant there, I forget how you pronounce it. It's under extreme danger if there's an accident there, or it's bombed or whatever. Most of Europe could be contaminated with radioactivity, and what he's working on is making a proposal for me also, is to see if there could be a group, an international group, nonviolent protectors, because there are some whatever it's called, IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, has some people in there who are asking for some protection. So anyway, we're seeing if there'd be an international group of people that'd be willing to go and be a unarmed civilian protection of that nuclear power plant. And literally, if there were an accident or something horrible happened there, there could be millions of people dying. over the next years. So it's it's a tremendous opportunity right this moment for people committed to nonviolence. They put their lives on the line to try to stop this madness.
Yeah, I just want to point out, as someone who has half Romanian heritage, but really that's kind of irrelevant, that what David was referring to and named unarmed civilian protection is actually a well-developed institution, not just an ad hoc idea. And a group that David, in fact, co-founded with Mel Duncan called Nonviolent Peace Force does this on a regular basis. I think they now have something like 200 people who are trained, ready to go in teams into various countries. And there are 70 such people in North Sudan at the moment, if I understand it. But the main point is that, when we use violence, we don't just go out on the street and recruit some people and put a weapon in their hand that they don't know how to use. And they say, now go and fight. We train people and we select people. And of course, we have different criteria for nonviolence, but the need to train and select is just as great. And that, in fact, is what the Metta Center is about, is to provide at least the cognitive part of the learning, so that people who do nonviolence will be able to do it more safely and more effectively. That's kind of our motto, that they understand how it works, that they apply it as early as possible in a developing conflict, and that they can carry it out and understand the costs. And if you do it right, it's almost invincible.
And it's so important to all of the people working on this, work together, and we're stronger. Okay, let's go to Steve. Steve, for a question or comment, please.
Yes, hi, Michael.
Steve.
I just downloaded your book, and I look forward to reading it. I did read the foreword by Pramila Jayapal, who is the member of Congress, and I believe the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Now, I know she initially voted against military aid to Ukraine back in early March, but in May, I think it was May 10th, that the Democrats in the House voted unanimously to fund $40 billion in aid to Ukraine, 20 billion of which is unrestricted. So basically could be used for military purposes. So my question for you, Michael, is, do we hold somebody like Pramila Jayapal accountable for that kind of a vote? Or do we kind of, do we want to, obviously we support, she understands, the direction we need to go in, but when she votes for something that basically is realistically resulting in military lethal aid going to Ukraine, how do we respond to that? Do we hold her accountable? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Pramila right in David Hartso's house, so this is gets kind of personal. She's been very helpful for the film. I would say it would be extremely hypocritical and extremely unfair of us to hold her accountable for that vote. We have put her into a situation where she had to do something that she hated to do. And you can't expect everybody to sacrifice themselves and their careers and their families on every time an issue like this comes up. So the lesson here is not the personalistic one against her or for her, but rather, how did we create a system where good people are forced to do bad things? And how can we create the alternative?
Yes, a system where we flourish and we're our best selves. Yes. Now we'd like to go to Sharon. Sharon, your comment and question, please.
Thank you. Hi, Michael. It's great to see you and hear you speak. And congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
I know that the Metta Center is a wonderful organization, and I really appreciate it. And I'm just wondering, how can we be more effective? Because we have quite a number of really well-meaning organizations pushing for positive transformational change in our country, and we see what we're up against. I'm just curious what your thoughts are, how we can, maybe work more in coalition. I realize it's really difficult. There are challenges to that, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. Yeah, it would be absolutely wonderful if we would all act in a concerted way. I think we would be absolutely unstoppable. I mean, even if 3/4 of us were to kind of get together, and I think the question would be to find the right issue. Something we can all agree on, and that would be less than an all or nothing kind of question, and one in which we are nonetheless prepared to sacrifice, if nothing else, sacrifice our individual separate advantage. We give up saying, my organization did this, haha, and yours didn't, but rather submerge our individual egotism, which is always the question, in a group effort, pick the right issue and use the right mechanism. And again, I think no one would be able to stop. This is the ultimate force in the world. But unfortunately, we just trained to work together with people with whom we have maybe not quite exactly the same outlook. So we're trained to latch onto differences and to fight for our own individual positions. And it's the whole culture is kind of providing a framework which is weighing us down, holding us back. That's where we have to turn against it, to create a different culture.
Exactly. We're so individualistic, and
Yep.
that's true. I want to put my name on. I thought of this. I thought instead of we're all one and we're all affecting each other, and we all stand on the shoulders of the people prior and the people that are here now, and we're all listening to ideas, and then we get a different idea. So somehow to take away that need to, this is my idea, this is my organization, I am on the hierarchy, and get more towards partnership systems.
And all the essential ingredients, as Mel likes to say this, all the ingredients are in place. We have the music, we have the ideas, we have the institutions ready to roll. It just requires confidence, ultimately confidence in ourselves, in who we are as human beings. And that's where spiritual practice comes in. It can be very helpful because it reminds us who we are, and who we are is always in the direction of unity, not in the direction of separateness. The more we understand who we are, the less we think of ourselves as a separate fragment.
Do you have, I was just going to say, do you have another tip for people how to do that? Anything else you want to add for that?
Well, if you go to our website, Metta Center or Third Harmony, you eventually get directed to the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation, which promotes a very scientific, very effective technique for meditation. It's not just, sitting in the right posture and letting your mind wander. But in order to reach who we really are and our connectedness with others, there's just nothing like it. It's hard work, but it took a lot of hard work to get us in this mess that we're in. The difference being that this work, every step of the way, is rewarding and fulfilling.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. Yes, I'm definitely going there. As far as a topic that everyone should agree on would be getting rid of nuclear weapons and the urgency of that. Michael, go ahead.
My one last comment is, if you like the book, you'll love the film.
Michael, this has been beautiful and rewarding.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you from me. Now we're going to go back to Arthur to close. Arthur, go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Michael. This is really extraordinary. And one of the key things that you're working on now that we want to collaborate with you on is creating a new story. That is so fundamental to this shift in the world. You know, it's so interesting. All around the world, this is the amazing thing. Everybody is trying to do good and help their fellow people around and help themselves. Take a look, you know, the suicide bomber is so dedicated to Allah or to his people that he's willing to blow himself up. The warrior, whether it's Putin or Saddam Hussein, or whoever else, they're all working for good, but they've got a different story. And all these people with different stories, the stories are clashing. And so they're fighting and killing each other, but because they're all trying to do good in a different way. Now, here's the key thing we have to do. We have to get our stories aligned in this world. We have to somehow come out with a new meta story that brings us together. And I'm so glad you're doing that through games, through entertainment. And one of our objectives here at the People Powered Planet, and my personal objective in life, is to eventually, you know, get a TV series going with where people are dwelling and young people are enjoying being in a whole new future. And actually, you can watch a pretty darn good example of that if you watch the replay in our podcast of our podcast with Nicholas Meyer, who directed both the most powerful cautionary tale the day after that shook up a society and got President Reagan to give up on his ideas of fighting and winning a nuclear war and to actually reduce them with the Soviets. But he also directed and wrote several of the Star Trek movies, which actually did give us a vision of a future in which, you know, there are rational people traveling around trying to deal with terrible problems, and a future in which you couldn't even join the Federation unless you had a way to govern your planet. You couldn't be ungovernable like the current Earth. So that's an exciting replay. Do everyone please go to thepeoplepoweredplanet.com and join us. That helps us every week. If you become actually a member, you can go there to watch it free and join us. But we also would love to have all of you become members to work on building a future in which we unleash that superpower, which is each of us developing that new story that brings to transcendence the reality of what humans can do and are. So thank you so much for joining us. And I will at the end give you one more chance to give your website. But before I do, I want to mention next week's speaker. Next week, we have an incredible guy, Mr. Human Rights, Jack Healy. He managed to pull together for Amnesty International all the top rock and singing groups to sing around the world for human rights. He had U2, the Police, Gabriel, he had Peter Gabriel, he had Bruce Springsteen, Sting, Bob Dylan, Santana, Tracy Chapman. And the incredible thing, when you read his book and when you hear from him, he was just a very simple guy. He didn't even know who all these band leaders were. He wasn't in that music world, but he just reached out to them and touched their hearts, asking them to join him in the struggle for human rights. So thank you so much for joining us. Please do come back next week for an exciting interview with Jack Healy. And we have more exciting guests coming on up into the fall, so do sign up. And then let me turn it back to Michael for the final word, where he can tell us how we can watch his movie, read his book, and join in the efforts that he's doing to help transform the world.
Thank you, Arthur. Well, the simple access is through thethirdharmony.org. That would take you to the book, the film, and the board game. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us personally, it's info@mettacenter.org. And I'd like to announce that starting September 26th, for 10 days, we will be running an enormous project that's a nonviolence summit. And there will be literally millions of people involved in this thing, gulp. And my role was to put on a different group, represent a different aspect of nonviolence every day for 10 days. So I think we finally have got that wrapped, and you can find out about it on humanityrising.solutions. And this is the first time in my lengthy career that it looks like we might actually get to speak to people in the tens of millions, as opposed to the tens.
Humanity Rising. Wow, that's great. Do go there. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Come back each and every week to other exciting episodes of the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.